In the Mahabharata, there is a moment so shocking, so publicly humiliating, that it set the stage for the deadliest war in mythological history. The moment Draupadi, a queen, a princess, the wife of five of the most powerful warriors alive, was dragged by her hair into a full court of kings and nobles, and they tried to strip her naked. Let us talk about what actually happened and why this single scene changed everything. The Pandavas had lost everything in a rigged dice game. Yudhishthira, the eldest Pandava, the man known for his righteousness, had gambled away his kingdom, his brothers, himself, and finally, his wife Draupadi. Shakuni, the mastermind behind the Kauravas, had loaded the dice. The game was fixed from the start. But Yudhishthira kept playing because his honor demanded he not walk away from a challenge. Think about that. His honor demanded he gamble away his wife. When Duryodhana sent a messenger to bring Draupadi to the court, she asked one question that shook the foundations of dharma itself. She said, "Go back and ask, did Yudhishthira lose himself first, or did he stake me first?" Because if he had already lost himself, he was a slave, and a slave owns nothing. He had no right to stake her. She was not property to be wagered. This was a legal argument so precise, so devastating, that the entire court fell silent. Nobody could answer her. Not Bhishma, the grandfather, not Drona, the teacher, not Vidura, the wise minister. The smartest men in the kingdom sat there frozen because a woman had asked a question they could not refute. But Duryodhana did not care about logic. He ordered Dushasana, his brother, to drag Draupadi into the court by her hair. She was in her chambers. She was in her period. She was wearing a single cloth. None of that mattered. Dushasana grabbed her hair and pulled her into a hall full of men, kings, warriors, elders, teachers, and the woman who had asked the most intelligent question in the room was treated like an object. Then, Duryodhana ordered Dushasana to strip her, in front of everyone. Dushasana began pulling at her sari, and this is where the miracle happened. Draupadi, with no one coming to help her, with her 5 warrior husbands sitting in silence because they considered themselves bound by the rules of the dice game, called out to Krishna. And Krishna, who was not even present in the court, answered. As Dushasana pulled her sari, it kept coming. Yard after yard after yard of cloth, endlessly regenerating. He pulled until he collapsed from exhaustion, surrounded by mountains of fabric, and Draupadi still stood covered. But here is what people miss. The miracle saved her modesty. It did not save her dignity. The humiliation had already happened. She had been dragged by her hair. She had been called a slave. She had been publicly assaulted in front of every person who was supposed to protect her. And not one of them moved. Not Bhishma, who was bound by his oath to the throne. Not Drona, who was bound by his salary. Not Karna, who called her a woman of loose character for having 5 husbands. Not her own husbands, who sat with their heads down. After the miracle, Draupadi stood in that court and made a vow that still echoes through Indian civilization. She swore she would not tie her hair again until it was washed in the blood of Dushasana. She turned to Bhishma and said, "You call yourself the guardian of dharma, but you sat and watched a woman be assaulted in your court. What is your dharma worth?" Bhishma wept. He had no answer. Draupadi did not start the Mahabharata war. The war was coming regardless. But she made sure no one could pretend it was not necessary. She made sure every single person in that court understood that what happened to her was unforgivable. 13 years later, on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Bhima ripped open Dushasana's chest with his bare hands, pulled out his blood, and brought it to Draupadi. She washed her hair in it and tied it up for the first time in 13 years. That is not just revenge. That is a woman who refused to let the world forget what it did to her. Draupadi is not a victim in the Mahabharata. She is the conscience. She is the reason the war had moral clarity. Without her question in the court, without her vow, the Mahabharata is just a land dispute between cousins. She turned it into a war about justice. Subscribe if you want more stories from the epic that defined right and wrong for a billion.